What's going on, everybody? James Hancock here, back to review episode 6 of Sharp Objects, an episode called Cherry. I should say in advance that I am sick as a dog and have a lot of antibiotics and cough syrup flowing through my system, which might make me a little loopy, and I might erupt in a coughing fit in the middle of the video. But given just how much drug abuse and partying went on in this episode, maybe it's eerily appropriate that I'm kind of under the influence as I do this recap and review. In any case, before I get to the hijinks that went down on this particular episode, I did want to call attention to an article I read about the ratings for the show so far. Apparently around episode 4, for the first time, the total viewership dropped below 1 million views. However, it bounced back with episode 5. So while 1 million total viewers per episode is by no means some sort of Game of Thrones level home run, it's also nothing to sneeze at, and it looks as if this show has definitely found a reliable, consistent audience that loves what it's all about and is going to be sticking with it to the bitter end. And speaking of the bitter end, it's only 2 episodes away, and I feel like we have enough evidence now where we can start making some predictions, or at least indulge in some pretty strong speculation about who did what and who might have been involved in the horrific, brutal murders of these 2 girls. I feel like there are 2 crucial pieces of evidence that pretty much point Adora's way in this episode. One piece of evidence is a little ambiguous, but the other definitely got my spider sense tingling in a big way. But for all of you out there who have not read Gillian Flynn's novel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that front. But I don't want to get ahead of myself, so let's dive into the recap and then we can get to some speculation at the end of the recap. I apologize for all the rapid cuts in this video. I am coughing up a storm in between takes, so much so that I'm starting to sweat, but I'm determined to power through. But as I've mentioned before in previous videos, I absolutely love the editing style in this show, but what I really liked in this episode was the sound design. We got these really eerie, silent flashback sequences as Camille is seeing images run through her head. And I think this episode opened and closed with some of the eeriest moments that we've seen in the show to date. But after that initial eerie sequence, we get to see Camille and Willis the morning after the evening they've spent together. And we see that while Willis is completely passed out, totally nude on the bed because the heat is rising in the town, we can tell that Camille slept in the all black. And I liked how almost every single introductory scene at the beginning of the episode either showed people cranking their window units or turning on the fan. Obviously, the intensifying heat only adds an additional sense of urgency to the overall drama afoot. But I feel like this episode managed to pack a ton of information in there. But what I loved most about this episode was seeing the intensifying friendship between Camille and Amma. At the beginning of the season, they were essentially strangers. But now you see that Amma's being incredibly frank and incredibly candid with Camille. She's showing off all of her scratches from when she ran off into the woods, and she's thanking Camille for saving her. But she very casually talks about how she could link 2 of her scratches together and create a C for Camille. Camille is not at all amused at Amma's attempt at humor, and even asked her much later in the episode whether or not Amma does in fact cut herself. And over the course of the episode, we see that Willis is trying really hard to learn why Camille was admitted to the hospital. And we see that a lot of people have the full story on Camille, including one of her old cheerleading friends, probably the only black woman in the entire town. Camille's having a bonding session with her, apologizing for what bitches Camille and her friends were back in the day. And they're talking about a particularly traumatic moment where Camille, as a young cheerleader, they saw that she was bleeding down her thighs at practice. And of course, all the little girls started making fun of her, saying she was on her period. And it was only this one particular cheerleader that noticed that Camille did in fact already have the scratches and the cuts on her inner thigh. But as Willis is poking his nose into Camille's business, he decides to have a few drinks with Jackie. And Jackie introduced me to one of my favorite new expressions. And talking about the weather they're experiencing, she says that it's hotter than a whore in church. I've never heard that turn of phrase before, but I might have to put it to good use in the future. But after several episodes of almost no progress with the actual murder mystery, we do get a major break in the case when Anne's bicycle is found in a pond out by one of Adora's factories. The father identifies it by the seat cushion, and they start checking all the records of all the people who work there. But when Camille finds out that Adora has been keeping this from her, she justifiably loses her shit, which leads to one of my favorite exchanges in the entire episode. After Camille has walked away, Adora's complaining to her husband Alan about how she thinks Camille has overstayed her welcome. And Alan, who's a pretty passive guy, just agrees with her to get along. Of course, this is just one of many traps that Adora is an absolute master at setting. She says, well, I want you to tell Camille that's how you think. Obviously, of all the things that Alan was planning on doing on that particular day, probably last on the list was telling Camille that she should no longer stay at their house. But by this point in their marriage, Adora has Alan completely wrapped around her little finger and very quickly and very easily manipulates him into doing what she wants. When Alan tries to do Adora's bidding, it doesn't really go that well, but we do learn a little bit about Camille's grandmother, Joy. Apparently, Camille is a lot like her grandmother, Joy, and that the only time Joy was ever happy was when she saw her daughter Adora unhappy. Little things like when Camille was refusing to breastfeed, Alan said that Joy would start smiling in a really wicked fashion. So as dysfunctional as Camille's relationship might be with Adora, very clearly Adora enjoyed a very similar warm relationship with her mother Joy. I've been hoping for some more information about what actually happened to Camille that fateful afternoon out in the woods with the football team. And we get a little bit more information because Kirk Lacey clearly has been haunted for decades about what he and his friends did. He takes Camille aside, tries to apologize, says what they did makes him sick. Camille very clearly doesn't want to talk about it and kind of lets him off the hook. She basically says, look, from what I remember, you were unable to get it up, and it's something I never think about anymore, nor should you. From Lacey's emotional distress, I think we can infer that something really brutal and really terrible took place on that particular day. And I'd be interested in learning whether or not Camille started cutting herself after that event, or after she lost her sister, or perhaps even before. I don't know if in the novel or in the show there's an official timeline as to when Camille started cutting herself, but very clearly that event in the woods resulted in her cutting all of her hair off, so I imagine that played a massive role in her condition moving forward. But the major action set piece of this episode is when Amma successfully recruits Camille into going to a high school party. Amma and her friends find Camille at the liquor store, they drag her into a car, they convince her to take ecstasy. When they get there, Ashley decides to pick a fight with Camille. She complains about the fact that she's been telling everybody around town that she's going to show up in one of Camille's articles and that she has yet to appear. And Camille calls her out on the fact that every time she talks to Ashley about what she knows, that Ashley feeds her a bunch of bullshit. And here's where we get, I think, the most important clue of the entire episode. Camille calls attention to the fact that Ashley has these scars along her right earlobe, almost looking like bite marks. And when Camille asks if Natalie was responsible, Ashley retorts that if she wants to know about Natalie, that she should ask her mother, Adora. It's beginning to look as if Ashley and Natalie and Amma and Adora are all connected with what went down. And I'm frankly kind of chewing the edge of the carpet, waiting for more information. But the rest of the episode gets absolutely wild because Camille walks into a room where Amma and all of her friends are playing this game where you take a hit of ecstasy, you put it on your tongue, and as it starts to dissolve, you kiss the person next to you, and slowly but surely everybody makes out passing this hit from one person to the next. And then Amma shocks and amazes all these poor innocent dudes in the room by coming up to her own sister and kissing the hit into Camille's mouth. I will confess, I got a little bit of a kinky thrill from that particular scene. But in her own strange, warped way, Amma very clearly has a massive affection for Camille. They go out into the street, they go roller skating, they're really feeling their buzz. You can tell they're just tripping their faces off. The chief sees them out in the night skating together and tells Willis he might need to leave town the next day because they've got a little bit of information on one of the employees out where the bicycle was found. But the rest of the episode is all Amma and Camille. They go back to their place where they're rolling really hard, they're spinning around in circles. Camille's starting to get all these really intense images of different girls, some of whom are dead, some of whom are living. And Amma begs and begs and begs to sleep in Camille's room that night, and finally Camille relents. But quick question, as Camille and Amma are going upstairs to Camille's room, we see down at the bottom of the stairs a brief image of a little girl in white looking up at them. In the past, I've always felt like these flashes of a little girl in white we've been seeing through Camille's perspective. To my knowledge, this is the first time we've seen that POV where it's our perspective, not the characters. And I'm frankly not quite sure what to make of that, because if it's something that exists for real outside of Camille's own flashbacks, that has a massive impact on the story, or perhaps there was a cutaway to Camille's face and I just missed it. But I didn't get to dwell on that very long because Camille and Amma go into Camille's bedroom. They're lying there. Amma's basically running her hands over all the scars of Camille's back. And we see that Adora very sneakily and very quietly is looking through a cracked doorway at what's going on between her two daughters and what she might be thinking. Who can say? But very clearly she does not approve of this growing intimacy between her two daughters. And then we get one of the freakiest moments of the entire season where in the mirror we see the reflection of a little girl in white, and she says, I'm getting goosebumps as I even remember it. She says, "It's not safe here for you." It was absolutely creepy as hell. It gave me shivers all up and down my neck and spine. In spite of the fact that I'm not feeling well, I perked right up when I saw that bit. So overall, I found it to be a fascinating episode. The teaser suggests some really strange stuff coming our way. We see that Amma's talking about the best part about recovering from a bad hangover is that her mom gets to look after her. Amma and Adora just have the absolute most deranged relationship, because I feel like Amma on one hand is this wild child hellion who enjoys plucking the wings off flies around town, but whenever she comes home, she likes being treated like a little baby. This is as dysfunctional and strange as it gets, which is why I love the show. I think when it comes to pure raw emotion, this is probably the most powerful show I've seen all year. There are shows like Westworld and The Expanse that are insanely cool and insanely thrilling and exciting that I get really invested in the narrative. But when it comes to just pure, raw, unfiltered drama, Sharp Objects has to be my favorite. And also, as Hollywood movies drift more and more into giant franchises, and we see that the Hollywood drama in terms of movies is kind of dying on the vine, we really do need shows like Sharp Objects to scratch that itch for people who want to see adult drama for mature thinking people. So in my opinion, we owe a debt of gratitude to everybody involved in the show. They're absolutely knocking it out of the park, and I just can't wait to sink my teeth into the next episode. But if you enjoyed this recap and review, please consider subscribing to my channel. But if you want to talk more, you can hunt me down on Twitter at Colbrax, and I'll be back at you guys tomorrow night to review the second episode of Season 4 of Better Call Saul. But thanks as always for watching. Onwards and upwards.